The Mediterranean sun blazed like a forge over turquoise waves, turning every crest into a shard of silver that winked against the bastioned walls of Tyre. Anchored a kilometer offshore, the island city looked impossible, an alabaster crown afloat on the sea, its battlements soaring 40 meters high, its quays bristling with sleek Phoenician warships painted in royal purple. For 200 years, Tyre had mocked every invader. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian hordes had circled it for 13 grinding seasons and failed. Now, in 332 BC, a 24-year-old king from Macedon stood on the Levantine shore, staring across the water at history's most impregnable fortress. Alexander had never lost a battle, but Tyre was not a battlefield. It was an idea of invincibility cast in limestone and cedar, floating beyond the reach of ordinary armies. Yet, as gulls cried overhead and engineers sketched frantic lines in the sand, the young conqueror whispered to his staff the single command that would redefine the art of siege: "We will build a road through the sea." At that moment, the impossible tilted, and the fate of an empire began to pivot on the backs of masons, carpenters, and soldiers willing to move a continent one stone at a time. Picture the Near East in the spring of 332 BC. Darius III's Persian Empire, reeling from defeat at Issus, still sprawls from the sands of Egypt to the mountains of Bactria. All eyes follow Alexander, the audacious Macedonian who has already carved a continental scar with fewer than 40,000 men. His advance has been a storm of speed and shock, swallowing Asia Minor and Syria in a single breath. But strategic thunderheads gather at Tyre. For the great king, the city is a lifeline, a naval bastion that can sever Alexander's supply lanes and keep the Persians dominant at sea. For the coastal states of Phoenicia, Tyre is more than a capital. It is the heartbeat of commerce, the shrine of Melkart, and the storehouse of political prestige. Any conqueror who fails to take it becomes a footnote. Any conqueror who succeeds becomes immortal. Alexander reads the board with gambler's clarity. If he marches past Tyre, the Persian fleet can raid his rear, incite revolt in Greece, and choke the grain routes that feed his men. If he attacks and falters, his aura of invincibility will shatter, emboldening satraps from Anatolia to Egypt. Conventional wisdom says, pass by and hurry east. Macedonian wisdom, sharpened by Philip II's relentless tutoring, says break the enemy's fleet by severing its ports. That means Sidon, Byblos, Aradus, and above all, Tyre must fall. Sidon surrenders. Byblos opens its gates. Aradus bends the knee. Only Tyre, wrapped in water and pride, slams its gates and sends a curt message. We honor Alexander as king of the mainland. The insult is razor-thin but lethal. Alexander's answer, delivered without a tremor, is simply, "Build me earth where there is none." So begins an engineering crusade unparalleled in antiquity. On a narrow isthmus of beach opposite the island's southern wall, thousands of soldiers heft rocks, trees, and sand into the sea, hammering a mole, an artificial causeway that creeps toward Tyre like a granite serpent. Day after day, carts groan under quarried limestone. Hypaspists shovel gravel into the surf. Carpenters drive oak piles deep into the seabed to brace the rising artery. Tyrian slingers and archers line their ramparts, turning the construction zone into a killing field. Fire arrows lash the mole. Catapult stones the size of bulls crash down among sweating work crews. Bodies drop. The road inches forward. When the water reaches waist deep, Alexander orders two 50-meter siege towers, monsters plated with rawhide for fireproofing, rolled to the tip of the mole. From their roofs, ballistae hurl iron-tipped bolts across the water. From their mid-levels, archers answer Tyrian arrows in lethal volleys. The duel of engineers is on, and the Mediterranean holds its breath. The island of Tyre resembled an oblong shield 2,000 paces long and 600 wide, lying parallel to the coast like a beached trireme. Its eastern face, the inevitable target of the mole, rose sheer from the sea. A vertical curtain of cut stone glimmering with salt crystals, crowned by towers every 30 meters. Below, the seabed plunged brutally. The foundations of the outer wall stood in 8 meters of water, thwarting any attempt to undermine or ladder the battlements. 8 ports dotted the perimeter, 2 military harbors on the north and south, 6 merchant quays in between. Behind the crenellations surged a population of 30,000 civilians and perhaps 8,000 soldiers. Tyrian hoplites, mercenary bowmen from Crete, Phoenician sailors hardened by Atlantic storms. They were masters of shipboard warfare. The sea was their ally. Alexander, land-born but never land-bound, countered with audacity. He dispatched heralds to Sidon and Byblos, ordering every captured Phoenician ship refitted for war. Within weeks, 220 triremes and pentaconters under Macedonian captains appeared off the Levantine coast, forming the nucleus of what would become the Alexander Navy. But assembling a fleet, though crucial, did not solve the mole's torment. Each morning, Tyrian divers swam under the towers, fixing grapples to their wooden supports, then yanked them sideways with oared launches. At noon, fire ships, old hulls packed with pitch, sulfur, and dried brush, floated toward the mole, sails ablaze, sending columns of oily smoke rolling inland like storm clouds. Crews choked, coughed, broke formation. Whenever a section of roadway collapsed into the surf, Tyrian youths dove in, hacked apart the submerged pilings, and collected scalps as trophies. Alexander escalated. He knew that momentum, not massed manpower, decides sieges. At dawn on the 41st day, Macedonian catapults on the shore unleashed a barrage designed for terror rather than demolition. Heavy lead shot, grooved to whistle, screamed over the water and slammed into Tyre's temples and marketplaces, demolishing statues, smashing granaries. Amid the chaos, a unit of shield-bearing hypaspists sprinted up the mole, hauling a prefabricated bridge on greased rollers. They set it like a spear against the base of the nearest sea tower. Under covering fire, engineers swarmed across, carrying wicker mantlets to shield themselves against arrows. When the first Greek foot reached the island wall, he was cut down instantly, but 20 more pressed behind him. Tyrian defenders, forced to the parapets, suddenly found Greek archers scaling masts on ships anchored just offshore, shooting upward at their exposed flanks. And still, the mole crept on, 20 meters a day, then 30, then barely 10, when Tyrian sorties struck. The sea itself conspired. A Levantine gale rose without warning, hurling whitecaps across the causeway and toppling siege towers like children's blocks. Alexander's officers begged him to postpone until calmer weather. The king paced, eyes lit with a strange amusement. "Storms are but Persians without banners," he said, and ordered work to continue through the night. Soldiers lashed ropes from tower to tower, braced buttresses with timbers salvaged from ruined Phoenician temples, and sang Macedonian marching songs above the surf's roar. By midsummer, the mole reached waist-deep water that turned treacherously soft, swallowing cartwheels and oxen alike. Alexander's engineers responded with a latticework of cedar beams driven vertically, then filled the grid with boulders, reversing the seabed's slope until the mole poked above the waves again. At its tip rose a new pair of siege towers, clad in iron plates, scavenged from the armor of fallen Greek hoplites and stitched with fresh cowhide. Each tower mounted 4 artillery decks, stone throwers on the bottom, bolt shooters above, flame siphons on the 3rd level fed by goatskin bellows that vomited Greek fire, naphtha mixed with pine resin, across the island wall. Where flame touched wet timber, it hissed, clung, and crawled upward in serpents of green light. Tyre reeled. The defenders responded with their own metallurgical witchcraft. Bronze tubes packed with sand and pepper, detonated by red-hot pokers to create blinding clouds that swept Greek marines from the battlements. They fashioned grappling cranes to pluck Macedonian ships from the water, capsizing them onto the rocks in showers of shattered oars and panicked sailors. One dawn, Tyrian swimmers sneaked under Alexander's flagship, slashed its anchor cables, and sent the vessel drifting helplessly toward the open sea before the crew regained control. Each escalation fed the legend now coursing through every campfire in the Near East. The sea war where engineers dueled like gods. Then came the fleet, at last assembled. 190 Titot fighting ships under Sidonian and Cypriot pilots answered Alexander's summons. With the mole 2/3 complete, he executed a double envelopment at sea. His right wing swept north, smashing Tyre's fishing flotilla and driving their galleys onto the reefs. His left wing circled south, herded transport barges in a feint, then darted east to blockade the southern harbor. Trireme ram met trireme ram in geysers of brine and splintered pine. Boarding bridges crashed down amid screams and the clash of bronze. In 40 minutes, the Tyrian fleet was bottled inside its own docks. The island was now cut off. No resupply, no evacuation, no hope but the walls. Alexander offered surrender terms, garrison spared, city taxed. The king allowed a symbolic sacrifice to Melkart. Tyre's council of elders refused. They would not bow to a foreigner, whose ancestor Heracles they claimed as their own. Rage hotter than Greek fire seeped into Alexander's strategy. He ordered catapults shifted to hurl dead animals and buckets of swamp sludge over the walls, sowing disease. He conscripted every laborer in his army, even Persian prisoners, to widen the mole until it became a 2-lane highway of stone, 60 meters broad and shielded by wooden palisades. He directed the construction of a colossal battering ram, a 10-ton cedar trunk capped in iron shaped like a lion's head, to be mounted on a barge. The barge would nose right up to the seawall at high tide, and the ram would punch at the foundations beneath the waves. The final assault began on a windless morning, when the sea lay polished and flat, as if the gods themselves wished to see the outcome reflected. Alexander led from a trireme painted crimson, its prow crested with a gilded Apollo. On signal, Sidonian oarsmen pulled for the eastern wall, Barges lashed to their sides like ironclad escorts. Catapults on the mole thundered. Siege towers belched fire. Arrows fell so thick they stitched the air into a black curtain. The lion-headed ram hammered the seawall once, twice, 30 times, until a section 3 meters wide cracked like a giant's tooth and crashed inward. Through the breach surged hypaspists in wicker coracles, paddling with shields. Behind them came the companion cavalry, strangely dismounted, but no less lethal, leaping from ships onto floating ladders. Swords flashing. Street fighting on Tyre was a labyrinth of screaming and smoke. Macedonians forced their way to the agora, where Tyrian children cowered in temple courtyards. Alexander ordered banners raised over Melkart's shrine, signaling that the city, after 7 blood-soaked months, was his. But cleanup turned savage. Incensed by the siege's cost, Macedonian troops slaughtered some 7,000 defenders and crucified 2,000 more along the beach. Survivors, women and children, were dragged away as slaves. At sunset, Alexander climbed the highest tower and watched as the mole, once a raw scar of rubble, became forever part of the landscape, fusing the island to the mainland in a geological baptism of conquest. Tyre would never again stand apart from Asia. The sea itself had been rewritten by a king's will. The fall of Tyre sent shockwaves ripping across the ancient world. To the Persians, it was a siren wail. No wall, no ocean, no oracle could halt the Macedonian phalanx now. To the Greeks, it was proof that Alexander's genius extended beyond cavalry charges into the realms of mathematics, hydraulics, and sheer psychological terror. Where generals calculated supply lines, he reimagined coastlines. He turned geology into a weapon, ranged time against tradition, and drew a straight road where Poseidon had sworn none could exist. From Tyre, he marched south to Gaza, then to the oasis of Siwa, where priests hailed him, son of Zeus Ammon. Egypt fell without a fight. The great Persian fleet, starved of ports, rotted at anchor, or burned in its slips. All because one city, perched on a rock, dared to measure itself against the improbable. Walk the coast of modern Lebanon, and you can trace the outline of Alexander's mole buried beneath boulevards and beach cafes. Ferries now leave from a marina that never existed before 332 BC, gliding over waters once churned by fire ships. Swimmers, unaware, kick above the bones of builders who died stacking stones deeper than they could dive. Every wave that breaks upon that artificial tomb whispers the same lesson. Dreams backed by sweat transform maps. Alexander's impossible island conquest is more than a story of siegecraft. It is an anthem to relentless imagination. When the world presents you with an island beyond reach, remember the Macedonian who answered not with retreat, but with a bridge of his own making, and crossed it